I'm going to talk to you about REST, or REST APIs. Why is it called REST? Well, it stands for Representational, oh, I made a typo, State Transfer. Who cares? Um, what does that mean? I think that's just word salad. Honestly, I think they just wanted the name REST because it's nice and simple and sounds nice. Um, I think they just made up words to come up with that acronym, honestly. But anyways, it's a way of specifying a web services API. What's that? Well, it's an API. So if you're familiar with that from Python or Java or something like that. It's a way of interacting with a service or a piece of software. This is just a way of interacting with an API but over a network. And what makes it web is it utilizes the HTTP protocol. So this means, so what am I even talking about? This is just going to be a way for us to make requests to useful services using a pretty simple protocol. So some of these services might be like a map API, or maybe a weather service. So you can ask what's the current weather. Maybe you can ask for a service for like a comment system. So you can have like a comment on your comment system on your blog or something like that. A lot of services like this will use REST. So it's just really popular. It's really sort of minimalist, let's say. And it uses a lot of existing web technologies, and it works really well with Ajax. So it's got a lot of things going for it. I really appreciate that it exists and it's so simplified versus other things that could have won out. So yeah, I'm glad this is a thing. So let's take a look at it. Well, first let's take a look at reviewing HTTP. So if you recall, this is a protocol that has two messages: a request, so that's from the client to the server, and a response, so that's from the server back to the client. Within both of these messages, we have basically two halves: a header and a body. Now the header on the request, that's going to be the URL, so Amazon.com, an HTTP method, where that's going to be get, put, post, or delete, and then a body. So the body, depending upon which method is being used, could be form data, it could be JSON, or it could just be nothing. So you typically get request, there's not going to be much in the body. Oh, in the header, there could be a bunch of other things, but for us, we're just going to kind of worry about the URL and the HTTP method. So typically, we're going to be sending JSON as the body of the request. So that's going to be, if we're asking to create a new, say, comment on a comment system or something like that, or create a new user in that comment system or something like that. Now in the response, again, it has two halves: the header and a body. The header is going to be, again, has a bunch of different fields in it. What's most relevant for us is there's a status code. So say if you make a request to create a user, well, typically there's not a lot you want back, like other than maybe some signal that, hey, the request succeeded, the new user is created, right? So that's what the status code's for. This just uses the existing status codes, again, from HTTP. So 200 means success. I think 202, just off the top of my head, means ad succeeded. 400 means there, in just general case, there was an error. And 404, everyone's familiar with this. 404 means resource not found, page not found. So something's missing. And the body, again, here, if we're talking about regular kind of usage in terms of if you type in Amazon.com into your web browser, the body of the response will be typically HTML, right? Then it gets rendered by your web browser and you see it and you click around, whatever. For REST, typically the body of the response is going to be JSON. Usually this is associated with a GET request, right? Because we're asking for information, we're going to get back information in the form of JSON. So depending upon which type of request we make will either have a body with JSON in it or maybe no body at all. It sounds morbid, but it's fine. Now, the REST is based around this concept or of a resource. Really, this is just like an entity. It's just a very generic sort of idea of like a resource is something or application utilizes. So to make that concrete, I'm just going to use my to-do list example. So in my previous videos, I had a to-do list. It has a user, and under each user, they have a bunch of items to do, right? And they're just described by a string. So I really have two resources. I have a user who's identified by a username, and like a to-do item, which is identified by just a number. So for the user, the resources are identified by URL. So this might be, okay, at this, I don't know if todolistexample.com is the actual site. Go there. Maybe not. That could be dangerous. So yeah, let's just pretend that's just nothing. It's just a good example. Don't go there and get your whatever stolen. Now, for my user resource, I just have a user named Joe plugged in as an example. So this is, you can think as like a slot, like a variable. You just plug in whichever user is there. So Joe, Frank, Pete, Sally, Katie, Fuman 200, whatever. Now, resources can be nested. So you can think they sort of exist in like a tree-like structure or sort of a hierarchy. So again, each user has a list of items, and each item, the to-do item, just has a number that identifies it. So, for example, Joe, now we just have this sort of static string in here, to-do, to make it more readable. And then, so we're asking for, under Joe, look at his to-do stuff, get to-do item 102. Joe's a busy boy, he's got a lot to do. It's 102 items. So I always feel kind of silly explaining it. It's almost so simple, it's hard to explain. It's just based upon this sort of nesting of the URL, we're picking out, okay, we have a Joe type user. Under here we have a to-do item, with ID 102. Great. So that's the notion of a resource. It's essentially, it's the same. So one analogy would be, it's kind of the principal things you're going to be using in your application. So if you're, say, writing a Java application, the sort of metaphor here would be all the things you're going to make a class for, right? So if you have if it was a to-do thing, you would have like a user class, and a to-do item class, and the user would hold a bunch of them or something like that. Typically, the resources are denoted by a noun. So you'd have like a user, to-do thing, something like this, rather than being verb-oriented. So yeah, let's move on. Okay, so now we have a resource. What are we going to do with it? Well, there's those HTTP methods, get, put, post, and delete. There's some other methods, of course, but these are the ones REST sort of maps into essential operations. So post. So if we send a post request, that's going to be a request to create something. So we're going to send some additional data, right, as the body of the request. Then we'll end up creating a new instance of that resource. So like creating a new, to-do list item, right? Oh, I have another thing to do. How you're going to do that, you're going to make a post request. Let's make a get request. What does that do? Well, they map it into a read operation. So that might be, oh, I want to know about Joe's, to-do thing 102. Give me all the info about that. So maybe it gives you back the text description, the due date, a Boolean variable, whether it's finished or not. This is typically going to be JSON coming back. Again, it doesn't have to be. Oh, sorry about my children running overhead. It doesn't have to be. It could be XML or something, but everyone hates XML now for good reasons. So it's going to be typically JSON coming back. Put's somewhat new. So these were kind of get and post were like the first, they're the OGs of HTTP methods. Put and delete came later. Put's mapped into an update. So this might be, okay, I have a to-do list item. It's uncompleted. I want to say, oh, good job, Joe, you finished it. You want to mark it as complete. You're going to make a put request to the appropriate URL to say, hey, it's done. And likewise, if you want to just get rid of something off the list, the delete method is, guess what, a delete operation. So that's just going to delete that resource. So we're going to say, oh, item 102, we don't need you anymore, deleted, gone. So again, if we're talking about a resource which is specified by a URL, depending what HTTP method we specify in the header, we get a different sort of behavior. And of course, there's some additional data that might need to be sent along in the case of like post, for example. Because when we create a person, we might have to specify, oh, okay, here's their username. Oh, here's their, something like date of birth. I don't know why you need to know that, but yeah, something like that. You're making an app to scam people. You send in your social security number. Just kidding. Yeah, it could be any sort of relevant information, like username, maybe their preferred whatever. So that's how we're going to modify resources. Again, this is why this is a popular framework, because basically it's just URLs and you're just changing one field and sending in different data and different things happen. So it's very minimalist, as you can see. So this is my just to give you a little bit of an example of how REST applications are documented. They typically show up in this sort of style format. So I'm going to show you again my to-do list application. I'm going to be sharing this as like a demo you can work on later. The method specified first. So for get requests, we're going to omit the domain here. So it could be at whatever website. Now I'm just going to have this static string called API in here. Because this is a way of just sort of partitioning part of the URL space, if you will, into an API area. So a lot of sites do this. So if you're twitter.com, right, a bunch of URLs are going to correspond to actual like web pages and whatnot. You might want to have just this /API prefix, as they do, just to specify, okay, traffic here is actually going to do, REST requests, it's API requests. It's not someone trying to actually like view a web page, right? So anyways, this is pretty common to have something like API as a static string here. User, colons means what's coming next. This is basically a variable. So it's anything after API, this is going to be replaced with, Katie, as a username or something like that, or Joe Bob 5000. Right, so this is basically a variable. So we can say here, okay, we have these endpoints, these URLs that have basically a username embedded in them. If you do a get to it, you're going to get all of the to-do items for that user. So that's kind of asking for the user's list. Maybe you could, this is how mine works, maybe you could also specify some additional, if there's additional things associated with the user, you could send that too. But for my application, that's it. If you post to that URL, you're going to append one more item to that user's list. Now there's a different endpoint here. So I have a user, again, that user, it's nested. I have ID in here. So this again is just the ID number for a to-do list item for a given user. So if I ask for Joe, I might put, again, slightly altering my example, 201 or 102 here. This means I want that particular to-do list item from Joe, number 102. Give me just that. So I'll get back the text description of it, a date, a Boolean variable, whether it's completed or not. Maybe something else. But yeah, that's it. Versus, okay, if I put to that same URL, I'm going to update the to-do item with whatever's sent. In my application, it actually just toggles it from completed to uncompleted to completed. So that's the main usage here. Is okay for Joe. Say item 102 is done, and then delete. Finally, that just removes that particular item. We don't want it on the list anymore. So hopefully that kind of outlines the main sort of REST concepts, and I'll have a follow-up video of showing kind of a little more of a tutorial hands-on how to interact with it. Yeah, thanks for listening.